History forgets the fall of the Tzars. The Tzars had been ruling Russia since 1480 and had a long and pompous history. The Tsar was an emperor, a cross between a dictator and a monarchy. The last Tsar of Russia was Nicholas II. By 1917, Nicholas was fighting the Germans in World War I, and Tsarina Alexandra was left to run the government. However, the government collapsed and power was virtually in the hands of strikers and mutineering soldiers. Conditions for the Russian people were at a breaking point due to the government's failure to produce supplies and goods. They saw the Tsar living a luxurious life while they themselves were starving. By 1917, the whole of Russia was near collapse. 15 million farm workers had been sent to help the fight against Germany, and food prices soared. Food shortages and the harsh winter weather led people to riot, and police and soldiers didn't feel obligated to remain loyal to the regime. Revolution was inevitable. After a devastating attack on a crowd, killing 200, the Volensky Regiment held a mutiny and was quickly followed by 4 other regiments on March 12, 1917. By that evening, 60,000 soldiers had joined the revolution. Soviets had already formed the nucleus of a provisional government and made the decision that Nicholas must abdicate. Nicholas was urged by his generals and the few remaining loyal troops to comply, and as the provisional government held his family in their hands, he was forced to submit. Nicholas's first choice to abdicate to was his son Alexei, but he suffered from hemophilia and would not be living long outside of his parents' protection. This would not work because the Tsar and Tsarina would be forced into exile. Nicholas chose his brother Mikhail as the next emperor. Some believe Mikhail abdicated the throne, but instead he declined until the people were allowed to vote on the issue of continuing the monarchy or switching to a republic. The Bolsheviks didn't have this in mind, however, and Mikhail deferred his power. The Bolshevik Revolution ended 3 centuries of Romanov rule. It also put an end to a culture that would never again be the same. Many churches and monasteries were closed. Valuables of former aristocrats were vandalized, and there was a massive suppression of religious and folk art forms. It brought joy to liberals and socialists in England and France, as well as Americans, because they were all fighting against empires, such as Germany. After his abdication, Tsar Nicholas II's title was reduced simply to Nicholas Romanov, and he was reunited with his family. He was placed under house arrest, surrounded by guards, and confined to their quarters. He was rudely searched the first night back with his family, but the ex-Tsar remained calm and dignified. He even insisted his children return to their lessons and lead as normal of a life as possible. He kept a keen interest in the war through the papers. The family was moved in August 1917, allegedly for their protection against the rising tide of the revolution. The Bolsheviks officially took power in 1917, and the Romanovs' imprisonment grew stricter. Nicholas continued to remain calm as threats of putting him on trial grew more frequent. He underestimated Lenin's power and began to believe that his abdication was doing Russia more harm than good. By July 1918, a counter-revolutionary force made its way toward the ex-Tsar and his family in hopes of freeing them. They were the White Army. However, their advance only sealed the fate of the Romanov family. In the early hours of June 17, 1918, Nicholas and his family were herded into the cellar of their prison house. Along with them went the family doctor, their maid, and 2 waiters. None of them asked any questions as to why they were awoken, nor did any of them weep or cry. One soldier present remarked that they seemed to guess their fate, yet none of them uttered a single word. Shortly after 1 a.m., gunfire ensued on the family. Nicholas's 4 daughters, fearing their jewels would be taken from them, had spent many weeks sewing the precious stones into the lining of their corsets. The daughters had happened to be wearing these corsets on the night of their execution, and they acted as a makeshift bulletproof vest. The daughters had not known this would happen. However, after seeing that the daughters were not dying, the gunmen were ordered to use their bayonets to stab them in the chest. Alexei also survived the onslaught of the gunfire. This is ironic because he was a hemophiliac and was protected even from the slightest bruises and scrapes because they could kill him. 3 shots to the head effectively killed him. The bodies were then taken to a pit, doused in acid, then burned. The remains were then buried in a pit. A few days later, the White Army was still advancing toward their location, and fearing they would be discovered, their remains were dug up and reburied in another location where they lied undisturbed till 1991. The Romanov family and servants were reburied in St. Petersburg in 1998. For decades, the elusive story of Nicholas's youngest daughter Anastasia, having escaped the fate of her family, was brought in question when the remains were heavily examined in 1991. The remains were mixed together with one another after being reburied, but it is believed that Anastasia was, in fact, murdered along with her family. Along with the remains were the bones of a young girl, matching the age and height of Anastasia. More remains were again found in 2007 of a young woman and a young boy. These remains were heavily examined and pronounced to be that of Anastasia and her younger brother Alexei. Many had claimed over the years to be Anastasia herself, but after the findings of these remains, it has been proven that Anastasia did in fact die along with her family on July 17, 1918. Tsar Nicholas's abdication in 1918 effectively ended over 4 centuries of monarchical ruling and over 3 centuries of the Romanov dynasty. Its succeeding government rulers proved to be detrimental to Russia and changed the culture of a nation forever. Restoration of the Russian culture has only been developing for 17 years, but Russian life will never again be the same. It is also important to note that many depict the daughters and son of Nicholas to be young children at their deaths. They did in fact die young, but not as juvenile as is commonly thought. Grand Duchess Olga was 23, Tatiana was 21, Maria was 19, Anastasia was 17, and Tsarevich Alexei was 14.